Welcome to the Elvis Presley Channel. Ann-Margret was the exact opposite of Priscilla. She sparkled, she could dance, she could sing, she could be desirable, smart, but also shy and modest. On top of that, she was the female version of Elvis. Indeed, all the insecurities and fears of Priscilla were justified. How Priscilla felt about Elvis's affair with Ann-Margret. Make sure to watch the video until the end, and if you are new here, don't forget to join our wonderful community by subscribing to my channel. Priscilla broke the vase in rage. The king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, is not just known for his iconic music, but he was the man who could win the heart of any woman he wanted. But the two women who he truly cared about were his friend Ann-Margret and his wife, Priscilla Presley. Both women shared their memoirs where they mentioned their love and respect for Elvis. However, the relationship between these two women was not friendly for obvious reasons. Can you imagine how a girl who was waiting for someone to marry her can feel about her fiancé's intense affair? That's how Priscilla Presley felt about Ann-Margret. Before she became Priscilla Presley, Elvis's younger girlfriend moved into his Memphis estate, Graceland, during her high school. After waiting for Elvis for years, Priscilla hoped that her dreams of marrying the king of rock and roll would come true soon. She recalled in her People article the sound of cameras flashing and her parents' approval as she married the rock and roll legend. She also acknowledged now being referred to as his wife was a nicer label than some other names she'd been called. But it wasn't all wedding bells and romance right away. In fact, Elvis and Priscilla went through several trials before they tied the knot. After rumours got out that Elvis had an affair with his co-star Ann-Margret while they were filming Viva Las Vegas, the couple nearly broke up. The day Elvis was leaving Graceland for filming Viva Las Vegas, Priscilla felt uneasy about the fact that he was going to work with Ann-Margret. Priscilla's prediction proved correct. Elvis and Ann-Margret dated for a year. Priscilla was enraged to see news of his relationship with Ann-Margret in the media, and she broke a vase in a rage. Ann-Margret was known as the female version of Elvis, and it apparently made Priscilla jealous of her. In her memoir, she mentioned that Elvis assured her that it's over, but even after Las Vegas was completed, the rumours of their affair re-emerged. That resulted in a huge argument between Elvis and Priscilla. When Elvis stopped receiving Ann-Margret's calls, she sent him a telegram confirming their breakup. Priscilla got that and flushed it out, which shows how much she hated her. Afterward, the Don't Be Cruel singer tied the knot with Priscilla. Despite this, Ann-Margret and Elvis shared a lasting friendship and deep respect over time. Certainly that was not acceptable for Priscilla, who was not a young mouldable girl anymore. Furthermore, Elvis's interest in other women and his controlling behaviour eventually resulted in a divorce between the couple. Priscilla Beaulieu and Elvis Presley entered into a years-long romance after they met when Priscilla was only 14 years old. While living in West Germany, where the New York City native moved with her mom and dad, Paul, a U.S. Air Force captain, after he was transferred there in the late 50s. She was invited to a party at the house Elvis rented in Bad Neuem during his stint in the U.S. Army. The moment she met Elvis, then in his mid-20s and already a superstar with hits like Hound Dog, Priscilla knew immediately she had to keep him. She later said, "I wanted to go places with him. I would cry if I couldn't be around him." In 1963, 3 years after Elvis returned to the U.S., Priscilla's parents let her move from Germany to Memphis, where the Tupelo, Mississippi-born star had moved with his family as a teen, on the condition that she lives with his father and stepmother in their home a mile away from his Graceland mansion. When Priscilla Presley just started dating Elvis, she thought she was living a dream life. Oh, how many girls envied her! Elvis was the biggest star in those days and was handsome and charming. What more could Priscilla wish for? Their age gap was never a problem for Elvis, as he thought he could transform Priscilla into his perfect woman. 4 years later, when he was 32 and she was 21, they were married, and it was Elvis's first and last marriage ever. Elvis Presley's wedding details were kept secret, and only years after it took place, more facts about it were discovered. Sadly, as time went by, it became clear to Priscilla that Elvis wasn't perfect. Speaking about their deteriorating relationship, she said more than once that he became controlling, jealous, and overprotective. On top of that, his relationship with Ann-Margret disturbed Priscilla a lot. So even before they got married, Priscilla knew she wasn't the only woman in Elvis's life. The chemistry between Elvis Presley and Swedish singer Ann-Margret was palpable, and it didn't disappear when the cameras stopped rolling. By the time George Sidney fatefully introduced the pair on the set of their 1964 movie musical, later infamous because of their palpable on-screen chemistry, Elvis was already an icon, and Ann-Margret had found success with movies like Bye Bye Birdie. In her 1994 autobiography, My Story, Ann-Margret explained that her affair with Elvis felt inevitable almost immediately after they met. All of Elvis's pals enjoyed having Ann-Margret around, but they didn't feel the same about his wife-to-be, Priscilla Presley. Elvis's cousin, Billy Smith, in particular, was a big fan of Ann-Margret. Billy said she made his life easier because she understood him and didn't make any demands on him. On the contrary, Billy felt that Priscilla didn't understand Elvis's friends, specifically the members of the Memphis Mafia. At the time, Elvis had every intention of marrying Priscilla. The pair did get married, but it was not as cut and dry as Priscilla may have hoped. There would be some conflict in the love triangle as Ann-Margret and Elvis got to know each other better. It didn't help that rumours started to spread. Despite being in a committed relationship, Elvis's feelings for Ann-Margret were apparent. The two had tremendous chemistry, both on and off screen. Marty Lacker admitted in the biography Elvis and the Memphis Mafia that he knew Elvis would have to decide between Ann-Margret and Priscilla. He continued, "And I thought if push came to shove he would choose Ann. Being that Marty was a close friend of Elvis's, you would think he was correct in his assumption. As it turns out, things weren't so straightforward. Billy Smith always stated that he not only thought that Elvis would marry Ann-Margret, but thought that he should." Where everyone was obsessed with the chemistry of Ann-Margret and Elvis, Priscilla was already suspecting this possibility from the beginning, but Elvis repeatedly assured her that Ann-Margret was a leading lady, and he wasn't too interested in leading ladies. Priscilla Presley was uneasy when Elvis left to work on the film Viva Las Vegas with co-star Ann-Margret. He walked out the door arm in arm with Priscilla. She desperately wanted to tell him how she was feeling. However, the king of rock and roll was too busy to have a private moment with his future bride. She said in her memoir, "Cursing myself, I wondered why I couldn't tell him what I heard. I'd been upset ever since I'd learned that his new leading lady was going to be Ann-Margret, the fastest rising starlet in Hollywood." Priscilla's concerns were raised when people started calling Ann-Margret the female Elvis Presley. She wrote Ann-Margret had made only a few movies, but she'd been dubbed the female Elvis Presley. Elvis was curious about her, pointing out that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Turns out something was backing her concerns. Elvis had admitted to Priscilla that he had affairs with many of his past co-stars. Of course, this was before he even met Priscilla. "They're into their careers and their man comes second," Priscilla remembered Elvis telling her as she wrote in her 1985 memoir, Elvis and Me. "I don't want to be second to anything or anyone." Priscilla concluded, discussing her feelings about Ann-Margret with Elvis wouldn't make things any better. "I realized that even had I told him my fears, he could have said nothing to put my mind at ease, because one evening he had made the mistake of telling me about the romances he'd had with many of his co-stars." Priscilla wanted to make peace with the can't help falling in love singer's love life. Trying to listen calmly to these stories, I justified his behaviour by reminding myself that I'd been living in Germany during those years and that we'd had no real ties then, she said. Priscilla wanted to believe her boyfriend would remain faithful to her while making Viva Las Vegas. Despite this, she was convinced he would have an affair with Ann-Margret. After filming the movie Wrapped, Elvis brought Priscilla to Los Angeles with him when he began work on the film Kissin' Cousins, and Priscilla's worst fears were confirmed there. By then the media was in turmoil about Ann-Margret's red-hot affair with Elvis, despite Elvis having completed his work with Ann-Margret 6 weeks beforehand. Elvis came home holding a newspaper emblazoned with his bogus engagement announcement with Ann-Margret. Priscilla wondered at the time, when will this be over? The news, the gossip, the headlines, the affair. Priscilla was enraged by the news, screaming that she was tired of secrets and lies. She threw a vase across the room and broke it. In response, she claimed that Elvis threw her on the bed and assured her that he didn't know his dalliance with Ann-Margret would end up like this. "I want a woman who's going to understand that things like this might just happen," Priscilla wrote of Elvis's bold declaration at the time. "Are you going to be her or not?" The King's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, decided to send Priscilla back to Graceland to avoid public controversy. Although Priscilla was by no means over the incident, she reluctantly agreed to head back to Memphis for the time being. She claimed Elvis promised her his relationship with his co-star was over. When Elvis returned to Graceland, his initial reunion with Priscilla felt forced, but as soon as he had a moment alone with his girlfriend, he tried to calm her down. Elvis told Priscilla of Ann-Margret, "It's over, Cilla, I swear to you, it's over." He added that Ann-Margret was from a different world, and that "she's a nice girl, but not for me." According to Priscilla, Elvis told her that he simply got caught up in a situation that was out of hand from the beginning, when it came to Ann-Margret. He felt exploited. Priscilla felt that there would be many more temptations, and that Ann-Margret would not be the last. Still, Elvis asked Priscilla to forgive him, saying, "I guess the devil made me do it," and Priscilla agreed. Priscilla then went through the King of Rock and Roll's make-up kit and found a telegram she knew Elvis had received from Ann-Margret. Elvis had stopped returning Ann-Margret's calls, and in response to that situation the telegram read, "I just don't understand." It seemed to confirm their break-up, but Priscilla's reaction reflected her anger. Obviously, Elvis had totally disassociated himself from her, cutting off their ties, Priscilla wrote in her book. But knowing the telegram was there bothered Priscilla. "I simply tore it to shreds, and with total gratification flushed it down the toilet," she wrote. Elvis laughed at Priscilla, saying, "I guess I've got to keep on my toes." While Elvis and Me is predominantly about the Presleys, Ann-Margret plays a significant role in parts of it. On the other hand, the New York Times' Joy Harowitz reported Ann-Margret never mentioned Priscilla in her memoir. When Harowitz asked why, Ann-Margret simply said she wasn't there. Ann-Margret then shot Harowitz a dagger look. Ann-Margret knew her relationship with the King couldn't last due to his engagement. She wrote in My Story of Elvis, "Elvis has always been honest with me, but still it was a confusing situation. We continued to see each other periodically until we had dated for almost a year. Then everything halted. We knew the relationship had to end, that Elvis had to fulfill his commitment." Despite all the rumours and trials that had come along with Ann-Margret, Elvis ultimately chose Priscilla. Elvis knew Ann-Margret wasn't the woman for him. He needed someone old-fashioned, who would be happily waiting for his return at home, and Priscilla fitted the description perfectly. The two wed in 1967, after almost a decade of knowing one another. The wedding took place at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada. Just after a week, Ann-Margret tied the knot with her long-time husband as well. However, Elvis and Ann-Margret stayed friends, and a week after he married, he sent Ann-Margret a guitar-shaped flower arrangement, which he continued to send her throughout his life. It seems the stars' relationship lasted over time, even though Priscilla was not happy with that. Yet Elvis's affairs didn't stop with the Swedish redhead. After the birth of the baby, Priscilla realized that Elvis no longer wanted intimacy with her, although the singer continued to meet with other women. Even before the wedding, he said that he could not continue with a woman who has children. When Priscilla confronted him, Elvis told her to accept this. For some time, Priscilla tried to accept that, but she grew increasingly unhappy, and at one point she decided that enough was enough. Eventually Elvis and Priscilla divorced. After his passing, she admitted that even though the legendary singer liked the idea of marriage, she didn't think he could ever commit to one woman. Presley couldn't remain the same girl for long. She became an actress, and the woman she felt jealous of remained loyal to her husband, and also Ann-Margret was the only celebrity who attended Elvis's memorial. To this day the actress speaks well of Elvis. Surprisingly, Priscilla also speaks well of Elvis at many points in her memoir, but unfortunately Elvis couldn't continue with any of the two. Whether we talk about Priscilla's jealousy towards Ann-Margret or Ann-Margret's loyalty as a friend of Elvis, both cases indicate how much they loved Elvis. He remained alive in the millions of hearts and in the memoirs of both actresses, even after decades of his death. For two people to find each other on that level is a very precious and rare thing in life. Personally, I find it very interesting that Elvis and Ann-Margret did not end up together. But what was the reason for that? You can find out detail here in this video, why Ann-Margret knew she had to break up with Elvis.